Alrighty, folks, let's talk about the development of a conflict. Now, a conflict does not just start out of nowhere and just boom, happens. There's got to be something that leads up to that. Now, conflicts traditionally start small, and usually there's a limited number of parties involved. So we think of any different kind of conflict, particularly one that's become very large in world affairs, they traditionally start very small. Even if we look at probably the most famous and probably one of the most impactful conflicts in current contemporary political history would be Israel and Palestine. That situation started really quite small, with Theodor Herzl deciding that the Jewish people should be able to have a homeland in Israel as a place to go and live out their lives in the Holy Land of their ancestors. Now, that would be the initial belief. Even after World War I, initially there was a lot of kind of peace among both parties. Today, obviously, you understand that there's a lot more going on there. That was a really, really, really massive oversimplification of the conflict. We'll talk about that a little bit more as we get into this, but that's just kind of a good way to look how conflicts can start small and become something that's really kind of simple or between a few people versus something that gets quite large very, very quick. These do tend to grow as the conflict grows. So more people get involved in a conflict as the conflict becomes larger. Good examples of this, again, if we look at Israel and Palestine, initially, the United States was really not all that concerned with what was going on there. Today, the United States is very concerned about what's going on there. So that is a good example, again, how the conflict starts small with a small number of parties growing into something that has more parties as the conflict grows. So really understand that large conflicts are not simple, and they're not just a couple of parties. It's easy to kind of reduce them to that, but it's much more complex than that, or complicated than that, not so simplistic. State and non-state actors are also going to play a role in here. The responsibility of states are going to be different than the responsibility of non-state actors, just like the legitimacy of states is going to be different than the legitimacy of non-state actors. The way they respond, what they choose to do or choose not to do, and how responsible they're held largely is going to depend upon their roles. States, I would make a good argument, have a higher responsibility to protect individuals than non-state actors do, simply because of the role of government. So you could make an argument there based off your role of government, but really when you're looking at a conflict, state versus non-state actors, they do have some different role in terms of legitimacy, responsibility, and all those different factors, particularly when it goes to getting involved. Now, the language of conflict parties is going to be crucial because words impact perception. Good example of this, if you say 50 or 20 die in retaliatory strike, it's sad, people have died, but it was retaliatory, versus 20 civilians killed in an attack by country X. That's going to be implying a lot more impactful, right? Both situations are saying the exact same thing. Retaliatory strike, whether or not it is a direct attack starting the conflict or in response, it is still an attack and there were civilians that were killed. So how you choose to use your words are going to be very important in a conflict. So when you're looking at different sources and you're analyzing perceptions and point of view in terms of a conflict, do look at the choice of words that were used. Governments are very, very specific in that, particularly in terms of very bloody and violent conflicts, particularly around the use of the word genocide. We have intrastate armed conflict, which is just a simple another way of saying war without actually saying war. When you say war, that brings on certain connotations. States and non-state actors aren't going to want to say they're at a war. They might say we're in an intrastate armed conflict. Intra, between states, armed conflict. So really, it's more or less the same thing, just a different kind of softer way of saying war. We also can look at the idea of a terrorist versus a freedom fighter. This is likely going to come down to your perception. Again, what one views as a terrorist, another might view as a fighter of freedom. So it is important, again, to understand what words are being used, why are those particular words being used, and what impact does that have on the conflict. Another term to understand are guerrillas. Guerrillas are small, mostly organized groups of fighters, and they're fighting against a more powerful opponent. So this is guerrilla fighting is kind of not the traditional like line style of war. It's more hiding, small attacks, ambushes, and then getting out. Kind of the element of surprise. This is written about in The Art of War, so it's not something that's real new. It's been around for generations. However, this is kind of that style of fighting. Guerrillas and terrorists, you'll often hear kind of over intercepting and interacting, used interchangeably. That's what I'm trying to say. Same with the term freedom fighters. Guerrillas, though, frequently are going to wear uniforms, and the reason they'll wear uniforms is to try to increase their legitimacy. So if we look back when we talked about what increases legitimacy, who is and is not legitimate, uniforms can be a way of increasing your legitimacy. Now, I'd also like to talk about the idea of perception as reality. This is going to be something that is important in terms to understand when you're looking at a conflict. Number one, how a party perceives the other is influencing the way they are going to act. So if you think that one party is out to get you and trying to undermine you, you're going to have some suspicion on whatever they are doing, and you're going to respond differently versus if you have a real positive view of that individual. We also can look at a good example of this as Police Scotland 2023. They were found to be institutionally discriminatory, institutionally racist. Internal investigations, the chief of police came out and actually said this. His statement you can find on the website as well, so you can read exactly what he was saying. But there were things. So Police Scotland believed people of a different race were likely to commit more crimes, therefore they were discriminating against them. More arrests, those situations happening because of the belief set that they had. Also, you have the idea of a fundamental attribution error. Now, this is something important to understand when we're looking at concepts in terms of reality in conflict, right? So when one party feels wronged by another, they're often going to attribute this to the personality or the nature of the person they feel wrongs them versus examining the context of the other person's actions, right? So they think it's because you individually don't like me, this is why you're doing what you're doing, versus you're doing this to try to defend yourself, X, Y, and Z. Contrarily, they often also view the opposite for themselves. So they don't see how their actions might influence another to respond. They view it more as it's an attack on me as a person versus me on my actions. So we'll talk about this a little bit in class. This is something you can apply in terms of political conflict with different international parties and different states. You could also be something you apply in conflict with each other and individuals in a classroom environment. Party one and party two might feel wrong. It's, oh, because you hate me. No, it's because you're not doing your work. That's why I'm following up on you. Versus turn around of, oh, you just don't do this, blah, blah. Well, yeah, you are kind of being a little bit harsh on this person versus this person. Lastly is the idea of partisanship. Now, partisanship is certainly just the idea of a support for a certain party. So you tend to agree with one side way more than you go to the other side. You might have differing views based on who's involved in the conflict and what side you naturally agree with. And it's going to influence the way that you look at the reality of the situation. Comments, questions, let me know. See you later. Good luck.